You are watching Historically Documentaries, a show where we decolonize history and debunk myths and misinformation taught to you in school and on corporate media. I'm your host, Esha, and we have Janet doing the video editing. And today we will bring you part one about the myths about Nazis. Everything I do is directed at Russia. If the West is too stupid and blind to understand it, I'll be forced to reach an understanding with the Russians and defeat the West, so that after its defeat, I can concentrate all possible forces on the Soviet Union. Adolf Hitler to the High Commissioner at the League of Nations, Ernst Nolte, Der Europäische Bürgerkrieg, 1917 to 1945. Die Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei owed its very lifeblood to the heavy financing of industrial capitalists and the once landed gentry who were stripped of their property and real estate as a result of the Treaty of Versailles, following the defeat and division of the German Empire in World War I. Only 3 months after Hitler became the party's Führer in 1921, the NSDAP swiftly established the Sturmabteilung, SA, also known as the Brown Shirts. The name Brown Shirts was chosen to draw a parallel with Mussolini's Black Shirts. The SA adopted khaki Letau shirts as their uniform, which was originally worn by Germany's colonial marauders in East Africa. These shirts had become obsolete in the region after Germany's surrender in the East Africa campaign. The choice of these uniforms symbolized the imperial revanchist politics that the NSDAP embraced and propagated. Through the SA's actions, such as forcefully breaking strikes, dismantling trade unions, and terrorizing and murdering communists, Jewish people, Romani individuals, the NSDAP spread its violent ideology. At its outset, the party spewed a belligerent, folkish rhetoric. It followed the trend of many reactionary populist political movements with highly generalized and empty anti-banker rhetoric, with no real plan of action to actually help the people. By the time the NSDAP was in power, the party platform and brand was long consolidated into unwaveringly anti-Semitic and anti-Marxist lines. The populist message long downplayed into nothingness to curry favor with the industry magnates who steadily financed it from the outset. A cursory glance at Hitler's cabinet reveals a who's who of Germany's capitalist class, many of whom belonged to Freundeskreis der Wirtschaft, or the Circle of Friends of the Economy, or more simply called Kepler Circle. This was a group of industrialist landlords and bank executives who had pushed Hindenburg to appoint Hitler as chancellor through the Industrial-Eingabe, industrial petition, a demand endorsed by 16 signatories who were repaid handsomely following Hindenburg's gifting of power to Hitler and the Nazi Party. The effort, organized by eponymous factory owner Wilhelm Kepler, a man who would go on to serve as the chairman for IG Farben, the engine of fire and blood that allowed the Nazi machine to move it all. Following the rise of Nazi Germany, the glaring absence of anything resembling socialism within its borders becomes immediately apparent in the historical record. The word privatization first being popularized in English in the mid-1930s through articles from The Economist detailing the Nazi economic policy of selling off its state industries to private interests and shareholders, quite literally the polar opposite of socialism. Coupled with the Nazi paramilitary units making priority targets of union organizations and communist activity, in addition to their ethnic pogroms and complete focus on the capture and elimination of the USSR and all traces of Marxism in the Nazi platform, layered on top of the puppetry performed by the German capitalists to keep the party's head upright, we could perhaps call this case closed on the issue of the Nazis' antipodal and violent relation to socialism. Yet, at this point, this is but an overview, just the tip of the iceberg. Anti-socialism, Hitler's origins. The German Empire of the 20th century, hung over from the days of feudalism, was led by a ruling class of aristocratic nobility. As capitalism grew, the aristocratic nobility began losing their influence and grips on the helm of power to rentiers and industrialists of the capitalist class. However, as World War I began, Germany's military, also known as the Reichswehr, gained newfound influence, and the nobility had a short-lived resurgence. This was a war fought between the Allied and Central Powers, who used then unparalleled violence for the right to pick clean the still waking corpse of the Ottoman Empire. Germany's 3 million-strong socialist force organized a series of strikes to bring the imperialist war to an end. The domestic upheaval, coupled with numerous mutinies by active-duty soldiers, forced Germany to the negotiating table opposite the Allied powers. This produced the Treaty of Versailles, breaking up German territory and creating the aforementioned unfavorable conditions for the hegemonic aristocracy and the increasingly seething and malcontent bourgeoisie. Having submitted themselves to their own kneecapping, the German Empire's noblemen, landlords, and the insatiable monopolists could only watch as newly invigorated socialist formations led to the founding of the Bavarian Soviet Republic, Bremen Soviet Republic, Saxon Soviet Republic, Würzburg Soviet Republic. Unfortunately, these republics were woefully short-lived. In the ill-conceived pursuit of maintaining their alliance with the SDP, many of these socialist militias disarmed in accordance with the Treaty of Versailles, a condition that miraculously was not imposed by the SDP upon the ruling classes nor the Reichswehr. And under the guise of avoiding a civil war, the SDP had begun its first foray into establishing its historical brand as the devil's doormat and laid the basis for a Second World War. The still armed, still in power aristocracy and Reichswehr leadership formed their own paramilitary in 1918 known as the Freikorps, who cruelly gunned down socialists on the street, well aware of what had transpired in Russia between the alliance of the proletariat and the peasantry that was the Red Army against the White Army, representing the Russian Empire's nobility and its plantation owners. Following the October Revolution, many of the dejected and defeated whites would even be recruited by the Freikorps, given their essential identical raison d'être. They began performing the same tasks in Germany. The creation of the Weimar Republic facilitated a Cambrian explosion-style burst of political activity, with a total of 74 new political parties established across the political spectrum. In fear of the potential of a socialist party gaining influence and power, and during the demobilization period, the senior brass of the Reichswehr organized examinations for the assessment of commitment to anti-communism to find soldiers of the correct timber to infiltrate and inform on potential socialist threats. At this time, Hitler was on something of a lecture circuit, ranting on the importance of opposing Bolshevism. His lectures at Munich University caught the eye of the Reichswehr, resulting in the recruitment of Adolf Hitler as a mole to gather intelligence on the Anton Drexler-led Deutsche Arbeiterparty, DAP. The DAP consisted then of a few dozen middle-aged men that were hardly taken seriously, their primary political activity consisting of little more than socializing at their local pubs, i.e. getting drunk. In September of 1919, Hitler attended his first meeting within the party as a Reichswehr mole, and soon his talent for public speaking began to draw large crowds, people coming to see him loudly debate with members of other political organizations through Munich's beer halls. Within months, Hitler had garnered enough support within the DAP to be made its first chief of propaganda. His first act was rebranding the party from Deutsche Arbeiterparty to the Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterparty, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Regarding the use of the word socialism and other branding choices, Hitler explains, "The fact that we had chosen red as the color of our posters sufficed to attract them to our meeting. The ordinary bourgeoisie were very shocked to see that. We had also chosen the symbolic red of Bolshevism, and they regarded this as something ambiguously significant. The suspicion was whispered in German nationalist circles that we were merely another variety of Marxism, perhaps even Marxists suitably disguised, or better still, socialists. The actual difference between socialism and Marxism still remains a mystery to these people up to this day. The charge of Marxism was conclusively proved when it was discovered that at our meetings we deliberately substituted the words fellow countrymen and women for ladies and gentlemen, and addressed each other as party comrade. We used to roar with laughter at the silly, faint-hearted bourgeoisie and their efforts to puzzle our origins, our intentions, and our aims. We chose red for our posters after particular and careful deliberation, our intention being to irritate the left so as to arouse their attention and tempt them to come to our meetings, if only in order to break them up. So that in this way we got a chance to talk to the people. Mein Kampf, page 396. Later on, Hitler would elucidate this as a dishonest rebranding exercise. But on February 24, 1920, Hitler, before some 2,000 people in the Hofbrauhaus beer hall, would present the NSDAP platform. A 25-point list of demands composed of rabid anti-Semitism, hyper-nationalism, colonial revanchism, and vaguely socialistic-sounding items. Interspersed with the demands for the expulsion of immigrants, the exclusion of Jews and all those of non-German blood from citizenship, and the return of German colonies to settle the surplus population, were calls for the nationalization of all corporate trusts. In reality, state industries were instead privatized, that the state guarantee a standard of living to citizens, as a pretext for the expulsion of non-Germans should the burden of feeding people be excessive. Profit sharing in large industrial enterprises. Concentration camps were built as slave labor centers for German heavy industry, among a whole host of other sloganeered pandering, none of which would come to fruition, as by Hitler's own admission above, they were lies told for the express purpose of mass deception. In assuming the leadership role in the NSDAP in the summer of the next year, the unprecedented financial backing and media coverage that he and the party would go on to receive would serve to underline and solidify the full commitment to capitalism in both himself and the party. The beginning of the NSDAP. The early leadership of the NSDAP consisted of a motley crew of Germans who held vast real estate and wealth in Eastern Europe and the Russian territories under the Tsarist regime, like Ernst Hanstangl and Alfred Rosenberg, as well as former nobility, further fattened as overpaid officers in the German Empire who had come to miss the feeding trough like Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler, to name only a few. The suggestion that this assortment of pigs as leaders had any interest in the empowerment of working class or was in some way sympathetic to the proletarian side of the class divide only grows more intellectually insulting the more deeply one considers it. For instance, Ernst Hanstangl. Ernst Hanstangl was the German-American son of a Bavarian father, Edgar Hanstangl, a commercial purchaser and art publisher heavily connected to the Bavarian royalty, up to having an affair with Ludwig II's fiancée, Duchess Sophie in Bavaria, and American mother Catherine Hein, herself a daughter of a deeply well-connected family whose members include U.S. General John Sedgwick, as well as the godson of Duke Ernst II of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. As part of a business established by his grandfather, a photographer for the Bavarian royal court, the Franz Hanstangl Fine Arts Publishing House, both Ernst and his family had a vast art collection belonging to both royals and states that they had managed to ship to New York even in the chaos of World War I. While in Munich, Ernst was contacted by a fellow Harvard alumnus, Warren Robbins, in search of a favor. He was looking to send cultural attaché Truman Smith to Munich in order to observe its political scene. Hanstangl agreed to host Smith for his short stay and in the course of events was introduced to Adolf Hitler in a love at first sight meeting. So moved by this meeting with Hans Stangl that he was inspired to sell off massive art investments his family had made in order to buy and convert Volkischer Beobachter, People's Observer, into a daily publication, commissioned a redesign for its masthead, and claimed credit for coining the propaganda outlet's slogan Arbeit und Brot, work and bread. Dealings through the U.S. branch of his family art business, as well as his time spent displaying his piano virtuosity in the Harvard Club of New York City, had as well left him amply connected in the country to one William Randolph Hearst in particular, that allowed him to facilitate highly favorable early coverage of the NSDAP activities in U.S. newspapers. Alfred Rosenberg. Alfred Rosenberg is best described by this 1935 Irish publication. Born on the 12th of January 1893 at Reval, Estonia, where he completed his secondary education. He studied architecture in the Technical High School at Riga and at Moscow, whither the school had to be transferred owing to the Great War. After securing the diploma in engineering and architecture, he returned to Reval shortly before the German army entered that city in January of 1918. He offered himself to the Germans as a volunteer, but was not accepted owing to his status as a foreigner in an occupied territory. He remained in Reval over the summer of 1918 as drawing master in the Gustavus Adolphus Gymnasium. The day preceding the declaration of the Estonian Republic, he delivered himself of a heated harangue against Jews and Bolsheviks, and then set out for Munich, where on the 8th of April 1919, the date of the foundation of the short-lived Bavarian Republic of Soviets, he just escaped arrests by the Red Guard after he had been speaking in public for 20 minutes in denunciation of the Jews and Marxists. In that same year, he made the acquaintance of Adolf Hitler and soon joined his party, and in 1921, in conjunction with Dietrich Eckart, took over the management of the Volkischer Beobachter, the party organ of the Nazis to this day, sharing with Hitler the vicissitudes and dangers attendant on the formation of the NSDAP. Not till February 1923 did Rosenberg receive his status as a German citizen. In addition to his work as manager of the Munich Daily, he has to his credit a number of books that show him the outspoken and fanatical enemy of the Jewish race and the Christian religion, as well as the enthusiastic prophet of the Nazi regime. Rudolf Hess. Rudolf Hess was born in Alexandria, Egypt, into a massive fortune acquired through Hess & Company, an import business founded by his grandfather and passed down to his father, who had multiple estates across different continents. During World War I, Rudolf Hess served in the Imperial German Army. To quote his son's feeble defense of his father, already during the war, the family had lost its considerable holdings in Egypt as a result of British expropriation. Now the defeat of the German Empire in the First World War brought wrenching and even catastrophic changes in the life of the Hess family. A simple matter of the basest class interest. The German Empire's surrender in the inter-imperialist war led to the Versailles Treaty, led to the loss of immense wealth for a family of vile robber barons, a common refrain amongst the early woes of the Nazis. Hess, however, eagerly scapegoated the Judeo-Bolshevik canard as the motive force to blame for the Versailles Treaty, as opposed to any of the three parties actually involved: France, the US, and the UK. Perhaps due to his documented affinity for the British Empire, headquartered in England, then that most bourgeoisie of nations, after having spent his formative years in luxury within the veiled protectorate under Evelyn Baring, compelled by his own bourgeoisie class consciousness to be but a consummate servant of wealth and power. He would go on to lead detachments of the Freikorps in murderous raids on impoverished peasants and workers throughout Bavaria, eventually winding up in prison with Hitler following the beer hall push. While aiding Hitler in writing of Mein Kampf, he would introduce the party leader to Karl Haushofer, to whom Hess was a student. Haushofer would mentor the duo in his theory of geopolitics, a crude concept that flattens class distinction and contradictions to lines on a map and proximity to resources, creating a perception of humanity as a disposable nuisance obstacle with the weight and value of dust that would effectively serve as Nazi war signs and the basis of Lebensraum. Hess would remain wholly unrepentant of his crimes in the Freikorps and the NSDAP until his death of a long overdue suicide at the age of 93 in 1987. Hermann Göring, born in Bavaria in 1893 to Heinrich Göring, a provincial judge later appointed by Bismarck to Governor-General of German Southwest Africa, modern-day Namibia. The elder Göring's incompetence was on full display almost immediately. He signed a meaningless treaty offering the Herero protection that would never materialize in hostilities with the Nama. Soon he extended his house over ancestral Herero burial grounds. 2 years after his arrival, in order to boost the immigration of settlers, he perpetuated a hoax gold discovery. He left the colony in 1890, having accomplished nothing but ensuring the immiseration and deaths of the indigenous African tribes. The hoax succeeded in the goal of bringing an influx of German settlers. But as these racist settlers became increasingly furious about the lack of gold to be found, they began turning their rage upon the native population, displaying increasingly intolerable and savage behavior, which is often interpreted as the point of no return for the bloodthirsty colonial power, finally culminating in the Herero and Namakwa genocides that would serve effectively as the trial run for the Holocaust long before the NSDAP would see power. Surprisingly, given Hermann Göring's role in the Nazi regime and the Holocaust, his godfather and namesake was a Jewish physician named Hermann Eppenstein. Following the death of Father Göring, Eppenstein made a gift of a small castle to the family, and the younger Göring would enjoy a life of privilege and comfort until serving in the Luftwaffe in World War I, where he would eventually be promoted to commander of the Jägerschwadron, Fighter Squadron 1, where in the last days of war he was repeatedly ordered to withdraw the squadron to Taloncourt Aerodrome, then to Darmstadt, at one point being ordered to surrender the aircraft to the Allied powers, which he refused. Many of his pilots intentionally crash-landed their planes to keep them out of enemy hands. Because of this disaster and insubordination, even when the German Empire to not have been dissolved, he would have removed himself from the possibility of achieving any career advancements in line with his father, despite the achievement of being able to emerge relatively unscathed from crisis of his own making, just like his dad. And he took to a life of listless partying in the company of other fallen aristocratic and bourgeoisie parasites freshly plucked from their hosts, all nursing increasingly violent revanchist politics, a social circle in the Weimar Republic that seemed to guarantee one's intersection with Hitler and the NSDAP sooner or later. We rely exclusively on subscriptions from patrons like you. If you're enjoying this documentary and would like to support our channel, please go to historically.net and become a paid subscriber, or else consider donating through PayPal or Venmo. The links are below. Thank you. As we can see, this cabal of well-born ghouls were in no position nor of any inclination to position themselves or act as servants of the people, the working masses, in any capacity. They were born into luxury by exploiting the working class, and they intended to die that way. Priority one after the genesis of the Sturmabteilung was to impose great violence upon the trade unionists, industrialists, and the Nazis. Hitler was on such a tear of endearing himself to the German capitalists that in the summer of 1927, he penned a pamphlet titled Der Weg zum Wiederaufstieg, The Path to Resurgence, that at the time was not made public, circulated exclusively among prospective industrialist financiers, written at the request of Emil Kirdorf, that Hitler reproduced in writing the subject matter of a conversation the two had that so captivated him. Kirdorf said in a 1936 interview, "The inexorable logic and clear succinctness of his train of thought filled me with such enthusiasm that I declared myself in complete agreement with what he said. I asked the Fuhrer to put together in the form of a pamphlet the talk he had held before me. This pamphlet I then distributed in industrial and business circles. He also continued that Hitler had face-to-face meetings with the same industrialists who seemed impressed with the pamphlets. Shortly after the Munich conversation, as a result of the effect of the pamphlet written by the Fuhrer and distributed by me, there took place several meetings of the Fuhrer with leading personalities of the industrial region, on which occasions Adolf Hitler presented his views in terse and clear words. In other words, after reading Hitler's unfiltered political pitch, the people whose entire existence was based on being diametrically opposed to socialism were so taken with this man's politics, they began seeking private meetings with him to further elaborate on ideas laid out in a pamphlet where he restated from Mein Kampf the Lebensraum concept, adopted from his tutelage of Karl Haushofer, that Germany as a country had the right to expand infinitely in pursuit of self-development, a concept entirely opposed to the socialist position of a nation's right to self-determination, which unsurprisingly tends to involve the determination not to be invaded by bloodthirsty industrialists seeking infinite expansion. The new movement categorically rejects any class and class division and in its place proclaims a unifying German attitude, or that the class struggle is to be renounced and replaced by the belligerent, unthinking ethno-nationalism, an inherently antithetical concept to socialist politics in which victory of the proletariat in the class war waged against it by its bourgeoisie oppressors is a cause as righteous as it is utterly non-negotiable. Rallies against ridding the country of the scourge of majority rule and incorporating heavy industry as the fourth estate of the coming Nazi regime. Both proposals running in full opposition to the socialist goal of establishing a dictatorship of the proletariat, or the supreme enforcement of majority rule wherein the whims of capital cannot roughshed over the will of the people, as the means of production serve their will first, not where heavy industry is inducted as a branch of the bourgeoisie state and wielded as the tool to oppress the masses and all non-capitalist minorities. Naturally, this monstrosity of a pamphlet would need to be distributed in secret, as people tend to loathe being informed that the state will seek to enslave them for money. And any gaps in popular opinion could be disguised with the illusion of mass support provided by years of AstroTurf Nazi parades paid for with endless flow of capitalist cash. Not but 5 years after this pamphlet was circulated, ultimately not needing a single vote, in yet another private meeting, Hitler was handed the chancellor post and in turn the keys to the Republic. In his very first speech as chancellor and every subsequent one, he would single out Marxism and the Judeo-Bolsheviks as a unique and primary threat to the Reich. Even in the Nazi military code, it was spelled out how the Bolshevik prisoners would be accorded fewer rights. Bolshevism is the deadly enemy of Nazi Germany. For the first time, the German soldier is encountering not only a military opponent, but one at the same time steeped in the ideas of Bolshevism, so pernicious to the people. The fight against National Socialism has become part of this system. He conducts it by every means in his power: sabotage, seditious propaganda, incendiarism, murder. The Bolshevik soldier has therefore lost all claims to treatment as an honorable opponent in accordance with the Geneva Conventions. As the poem goes, first they came for the communists, and they did. After engineering the Reichstag fire, the parliament passed the Enabling Act and the stormtroopers lived up to their name, raining down on communists and surging through trade union headquarters, arresting their heads, their members, and seizing their assets, robbing them, in an effort to completely defang their primary targets and sole meaningful opposition. And all this was happening before the total war on the Soviet Union was even declared.